My name is Carlos Rubio Medrano. I am currently a postdoc at the Center for Cybersecurity and Digital Forensics at Arizona State University. Today, I'm going to be presenting an interesting approach for assessing risks in the context of attribute-based access control policies. Before we start, I would like to thank my collaborators, starting with my students Luis Claramunt and Seiso Yugani, and continuing with our research director, Dr. Gail Jun An. Start by discussing the motivation for this work. So we all know that ABAC is a very convenient paradigm. We can collect attributes at runtime for our policies from many different sources. As an example, we have a policy here to the right, which grants access to a mobile application to users who are running the Android operating system, are 21 years old or older, and are physically located in the United States. Also, we have another rule that allows access to administrators to the application. In this context, the attributes themselves may be collected from different sources. For instance, the operating system name may be collected by the actual operating system. The age of the user may be collected from a credential issued by the government. The location may be collected from a geospatial service. And the role that name attribute that identifies an admin can be located from authentication or authorization server that has issued an access token. In this scenario, attackers may try to forge these attributes. By forging an attribute, we mean they may try to manipulate the value of the attributes before or during their runtime collection such that they can match the expected value inside the policy, and therefore they can manipulate the result of the policy to grant and deny access to resources. Let's now talk about how can we forge attributes. Attributes can be forged in different ways. The first thing is to craft them entirely despite the source. That means that we leverage deficiencies in the runtime collection modules, for instance, the policy information point that is used by XACML architectures, such that we collect attributes from a completely different source, that it's not the one originally intended. We assume that alternative source is under control of the attacker. The second thing is we can change the value of an existing attribute while in transit. And to do this, we may leverage any sort of insecure collection channels that, for instance, may not implement any encryption techniques to prevent integrity and confidentiality. And third, we can actually take control of the source by exploiting a vulnerability such that we can craft our own attributes from source. And this way, we can actually defeat any secure communication channels that may be in place. How can we forge attributes? Let's talk about the different attacks we can perform with them. So before we start, let's take a look at the policy example we have here to the right, which shows our run example policy now in a different language that resembles XACML. Here we have two rules. The first rule is intended for regular users, and the second rule is intended for administrators. In order for a policy to combine these two policies, the rules policies, we are really using the deny unless permitted combining algorithm. So the first attack is the permit attack, which pretty much forces the violation of the policy to the permit effect. And this attack can be used to gain unintended access to resources. In the sample policy we have here, in order for this attack to succeed, and because of the deny unless permit, an attacker must control at least one of the two rules. By control means the attacker must be able to forge the attributes in either one of the rules such that he or she can warranty that that rule will return permit, and therefore, because of the combining algorithm, the whole policy will return the permit result. The second attack is the deny attack. This attack has the opposite effect. It forces the policy to the deny effect and can be used to perform denial of service attacks. In this scenario, however, for sample policy, the attacker must control both rules. since the deny unless permit algorithm only returns deny when no rule in the policy returns permit. In this case, if the attacker wants to make sure that none of the rules in the policy return permit, then he must be able to control the attributes of the two policies to make sure that happens. Finally, we have the indeterminate attack, which may be used to force the evaluation of another policy that happens to be more convenient to the attacker. In the case of a run example, unfortunately, this attack is not possible because the deny unless permit combined algorithm always guarantees default result of denied, which pretty much invalidates the evaluation of any other related policy. So, the different attacks we can perform against ABAC policies, let's talk about the problem we're addressing in this work. We call this problem the policy trusting problem, and basically involves assessing the level of risk for a given policy or policy set when the attributes that are listed on these policies become untrusted. By an untrusted attribute, we mean that attribute forgery attacks based on those attributes may be now feasible because attackers may be forging those attributes already, or perhaps they're going to be doing that soon. Um, I would like to point out at this point that solving or providing a solution for this problem is not trivial when policies depict multiple attributes, multiple rules, different combining algorithms, and may be grouped in different policy sets. Discuss RiskPol, the solution we have developed for the policy trusting problem. To start the discussion, let's talk about how to model trust and risk. Within RiskPol, we define trust as a perception on the security state of attributes. That means a perception on how well security requirements are implemented in attribute sources or the modules of our policy evaluation framework, such as the aforementioned PIP. Conversely, we define risk as the probability that attackers are forging attributes already. As discussed before, they can do that, for instance, by exploiting security vulnerabilities in the source that may be originated by security requirements not implemented correctly. As we can see to the right, there is a direct correspondence between trust and risk. High levels of trust are associated with low levels of risk, whereas low levels of trust are associated with high levels of risk. So in RiskPol, we model trust and risk together as a scale of numerical scores. For instance, 0, 0.5, and 1, where the value of 1 represents that an attribute is fully trusted, therefore it's not risky. The intermediate value of 0.5 means that the attribute is somehow trusted and correspondingly somehow risky, and the value of 0 means the attribute or the attribute source are not trusted and therefore are highly risky. Let's now talk about how can we calculate a risk score for a given APIC policy. To this end, we have developed a technique we called simulated policy execution, which is inspired by a similar technique that is widely used for finding security vulnerabilities in binary files by using automated testing. So this technique goes as follows. First, we're going to be placing trust scores on each of the sources of the attributes in the policy. As you can see here, we have 4 sources. 3 of them are getting a positive score, whereas 1 of them is getting a negative score. Then, we're going to pass the scores of these sources to the attributes that are produced by each of them. Later, we're going to leverage the structure of the policy, that means the number of rules, as well as the combining algorithm, to calculate the score for each of the rules in the policy. And finally, we're going to calculate an overall score for the given policy or policy set by leveraging the previous scores for the rules, plus the combining algorithm for the policy, as well as the policy set. So let's now illustrate our technique with a more detailed description featuring our running example. So as we explained in the previous slide, we're going to start by placing a score on the attribute sources and correspondingly to each of the attributes produced by these sources. And we placed a positive score of 1 to 3 of the attributes, whereas the 4 role that name attribute gets score of 0 because that source is not trusted anymore. Later, we proceed to set the scores for each of the rules in the policy by taking the maximum value among all the attributes in each of the rules. At this point, I would like to clarify that we explained in more detail in the paper how to get the scores for each of the rules in a given policy. Then, using the scores, we're going to calculate an overall score for the policy. We start with the score for the deny attack. In this case, as you remember from a previous slide, in order for an attacker to take control of our policy and return the denied result, the attacker must control both rules. In this case, the attacker may control only one rule, which is rule 2. Therefore, performing this attack is not possible. However, for the permit attack, the attacker needs to control only one rule. In this case, the attacker actually, since it's compromising the role.name attribute, the attacker can control rule 2. Therefore, that is sufficient for this attack to be possible. With the explanation of our experimental procedures, I just want to show you the different ways in which we can calculate a consolidated policy level score for policies with different rules and different combining algorithms. As you can see here in red, we have the way in which we have calculated the score for our sample policy and the 3 different attacks. About the evaluation of our approach, we conducted 2 experimental case studies. In the first case study, we collected 19 XHTML policies from related works in the literature. In our second case study, we collected 5 policies in the English language from different institutions, such as the National Health Service from the United Kingdom, the North Carolina State Government, and the SANS Institute. In terms of the methodology, we first translated all the English policies manually into XHTML. Then, for all the policies in the 2 case studies, we simulated the forging of various attribute sets. So the attributes were simulated for forging were actually given a score of 0, and all other attributes were given a score of 1, so they were regarded as trusted. And then we used RiskPol to check if any of the attribute forgery attacks were possible. As a result, most of the attacks were possible by forging just a few attributes. We also noticed that policies with several ORs in their inner structure were riskier, and then policies that depict AND operators were less risky and or the addition of AND operators may result in less risk. So we have an example here, this policy we collected from the state of North Carolina. As you can see, it depicts 3 different rules, each of them with different operators, and it uses the permit unless denied combining algorithm. For this scenario, the deny attack is actually more plausible because in order for this attack to succeed, you just need to compromise 2 attributes only: unemployed and needless, which are shown in red here in the structure of the policy. Also, the permit attack, it's more difficult to carry on because you need to compromise 4 attributes at once. As with the previous example, since the permit unless deny algorithm always returns permit as a result, then the indeterminate attack was not possible. Finalize our presentation. Um, so far, we have devised several things we would like to pursue as a part of our future work. First, you can see um, one of the possible drawbacks of our approach is the fact that you need to manually insert scores for the many different sources you can have for your attributes in different policies. That can be error prone and cumbersome and may certainly affect the deployment of our approach in practice. So we have devised um, an interesting approach in which we will introduce a middle layer between attribute sources and risk assessors we call risk evaluators. These evaluators will be in charge of keeping an eye on the security requirements and the security state of sources, and then they will communicate their scores to risk assessors. In fact, risk assessors may actually leverage the input of different risk evaluators and may combine the scores provided by them independently before making a final decision. This way, they will be elevated from having to implement all this score placing by hand. Then we also plan to provide some approaches for any countermeasures for risky policies. Once RiskPol has determined that a policy is risky, what kind of things we can do to reduce that risk? That may include introducing alternative attributes, alternative rules, or even changing the policy completely. Finally, we really want to prevent the forgery of attributes. We plan to work on security enhanced attribute collection and provisioning, such that all the attributes that are collected, let's say, by a policy information point, can be trusted at all times. Finally, as a takeaway, um, we believe that attribute forgery attacks are a daunting possibility, since they may allow for bypassing authorization mechanisms, and this can seriously affect the deployment of AGVA systems in the future. We believe RiskPol can accurately assess the risks for these kind of AGVA policies, and the technique we have introduced here, we call simulated policy execution, can be real effective for handling the complexity of many different attributes, rules, combining algorithms, and so on. Finally, we do believe that this kind of proactive risk assessment may be really helpful for deterring attacks before they happen. This is pretty much it from our side. We would like to thank you, everybody. And now it's time for questions. Thank you. We appreciate it.